Sarah Mitchell woke up earlier than usual that morning. The sun hadn't even risen when she double-checked her suitcase, making sure her presentation materials were safely packed. As one of the few black female neurosurgeons in the country, she had worked hard for this moment. Today, she would be flying to Chicago to present her new surgical technique to hundreds of medical professionals. Her teenage daughter Amy watched her from the doorway. "Mom, you look worried," she said, helping her mother pack the last few items. Sarah smiled at her daughter. She had raised Emmy alone after her husband passed away 5 years ago, balancing her medical career with being a single mother. "Just want everything to be perfect, sweetie," Sarah replied, sipping up her carry-on bag. She had chosen to wear comfortable clothes for the flight. Her favorite pair of well-fitted jeans, a white cotton shirt, and a professional-looking navy blazer. Her natural hair was neatly styled, and she wore minimal jewelry, just her wedding ring and small pearl earrings her mother had given her. The drive to LaGuardia Airport was quiet. Her friend Michael, another doctor from the hospital, had offered to drop her off. "You're going to do great, Sarah," he said, noticing how she kept checking her phone for conference updates. "They chose you for a reason. Your technique has already saved dozens of lives." When they arrived at the airport, Sarah noticed how different the private terminal looked compared to the main building she usually used. The glass windows sparkled in the morning sun, and several expensive cars were parked outside. A few men in business suits walked past her, carrying briefcases and talking on their phones. Sarah thanked Michael and grabbed her bags. The conference organizers had arranged for a private jet to fly the main speakers to Chicago. It was her first time flying private, and she felt both excited and a little nervous. She had earned this opportunity through years of hard work, countless late nights studying, and dedication to her patients. As she walked toward the terminal entrance, Sarah noticed a security guard watching her. He was a middle-aged man with graying hair, and his face showed clear disapproval as she approached. Sarah was used to these looks. She had faced them throughout her career, but she never let them stop her. She reached for her ID and conference documents, already knowing what was coming. The guard stepped in front of her before she could reach the door. "Excuse me," he said firmly, "but the main terminal is that way." He pointed toward the regular airport entrance, his tone dismissive. "I'm actually heading to the private terminal," Sarah replied calmly, holding out her credentials. "I'm Dr. Sarah Mitchell, one of the speakers flying to Chicago for the medical conference." The guard barely glanced at her documents. "Ma'am, this area is for private jet passengers only," he said, his voice getting louder. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Sarah took a deep breath, remembering all the times she had faced similar situations. She thought about her daughter Amy, who she was teaching to handle prejudice with grace and strength. "Sir, if you would just look at my credentials." "Listen," the guard interrupted. "I've worked here for 15 years. I know who belongs here and who doesn't." Other passengers continued walking past them, the guard not stopping anyone else for checks. Sarah noticed people starting to stare. Some walked faster, avoiding eye contact, while others slowed down to watch the scene unfold. She stood her ground, maintaining her professional composure despite the humiliation she felt. Just then, she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Dr. Mitchell, there you are." It was Dr. James Wilson, the conference organizer, rushing out from the terminal. He was a tall man with silver hair, well known in the medical community. The guard's face showed confusion as Dr. Wilson approached. Sarah could see the moment beginning to shift, but she knew this was just the start of what would become a much bigger story, one that would challenge prejudices and potentially change minds. Little did the guard know that the woman he was trying to turn away was not only supposed to be there but was, in fact, the star of the event he was guarding. The guard's face turned red as Dr. Wilson approached. He looked back and forth between Sarah and the conference organizer, still keeping his body positioned to block the entrance. Around them, more people began to gather, creating a small crowd near the terminal door. "Is there a problem here?" Dr. Wilson asked, his friendly smile fading as he assessed the situation. He was carrying a folder with the conference schedules and speaker profiles. The guard straightened his uniform, trying to maintain his authority. "Sir, this woman was trying to enter the private terminal," the guard said, still not looking at Sarah directly. "I was just explaining that she needs to go to the main building." Dr. Wilson's expression changed from confusion to understanding, then to anger. "This woman you're referring to is Dr. Sarah Mitchell, one of the most respected neurosurgeons in the country. She's our keynote speaker for today's conference. Sarah watched as more of her colleagues from the medical conference emerged from the terminal. Among them was Dr. Patricia Chen, another speaker she had worked with before. Patricia immediately walked over and stood beside Sarah, placing a supportive hand on her shoulder. The guard, however, wasn't backing down easily. "I need to see proper documentation," he insisted, now speaking to Dr. Wilson instead of Sarah. "We have strict security protocols here." Sarah once again held out her credentials, conference invitation, and ID. This time, she also pulled up her profile on the hospital's website on her phone, showing her picture and credentials. "Everything you need to verify my identity is right here," she said calmly, though her heart was racing. Other passengers had stopped to watch the scene. Some had their phones out, recording the interaction. Sarah noticed a young black girl with her father among the onlookers, watching intently. This made her even more determined to handle the situation with dignity. "Call your supervisor," Dr. Wilson demanded, his voice firm. "This is completely unacceptable. Dr. Mitchell is not only a passenger on our flight, but also the person whose surgical technique we're all flying to Chicago to learn about." The guard reached for his radio, his hands slightly shaking now. "Security supervisor to the main entrance," he called, still trying to sound authoritative. "Need assistance with a situation." While they waited, more conference attendees gathered around. Many were doctors who had read Sarah's research papers or seen her speak at other events. They began introducing themselves, deliberately ignoring the guard and treating Sarah with the respect she deserved. "Dr. Mitchell, your paper on minimally invasive brain surgery techniques was brilliant," one doctor said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I've been looking forward to your presentation for months." Sarah thanked them graciously, maintaining her professional demeanor despite the humiliating situation. She thought about all the times in her career when she had faced similar prejudices, during medical school, in residency, and even as an attending surgeon. Each time, she had proved herself through excellence and dignity. The security supervisor arrived 5 minutes later, slightly out of breath from rushing over. She was a middle-aged woman who quickly sized up the situation. "What seems to be the problem here?" she asked, looking between the guard and the group of medical professionals. Before the guard could speak, Dr. Wilson stepped forward. "Your officer here has been refusing entry to our keynote speaker, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, despite her having all proper credentials. We believe this is a clear case of racial profiling." The supervisor's face showed immediate concern. She turned to Sarah. "Dr. Mitchell, I sincerely apologize for this incident. Please, let me see your credentials." Unlike the guard, she examined Sarah's documents thoroughly and professionally. As the supervisor verified her identity, Sarah noticed the young black girl from earlier whispering something to her father while pointing at her. In that moment, Sarah realized this incident wasn't just about her. It was about every person who had ever been judged based on their appearance, rather than their achievements. The morning sun was now fully up, casting long shadows across the terminal entrance. What should have been a simple check-in had turned into a moment that would change more than just Sarah's day. It would change perspectives. The security supervisor's verification of Sarah's credentials should have ended the matter, but the original guard wasn't ready to admit his mistake. He stepped forward, still convinced he was doing his job correctly. "Ma'am," he said to his supervisor, "we've had issues with people trying to sneak into the private terminal before. I was just following protocol." His voice had a defensive edge that made several people in the crowd shake their heads in disapproval. Sarah watched as Dr. Patricia Chen pulled out her phone and started recording. "For documentation purposes," Patricia said clearly, "we need to make sure everything from this point forward is on record." The guard's face turned an even deeper shade of red. More passengers for the Chicago conference flight had arrived, creating quite a scene at the terminal entrance. Among them was Dr. Robert Martinez, a well-known hospital administrator who had helped arrange the conference. He quickly assessed the situation and pulled out his phone. "I'm calling the airline directly," he announced. "This is absolutely ridiculous. Dr. Mitchell is one of the most respected surgeons in the country, and she's being treated like a criminal for trying to board a flight she was specifically invited to take." The young black girl Sarah had noticed earlier tugged on her father's sleeve. "Dad, isn't that the doctor you told me about? The one who saved Uncle Mike's life?" Her father nodded, looking both proud and upset at what he was witnessing. Sarah felt a mix of emotions: frustration, determination, and a deep sense of responsibility. She thought about her daughter Amy, who had faced similar prejudices at school. She had always taught Amy to handle such situations with grace and strength, and now she needed to live up to those same principles. The supervisor tried to defuse the situation. "Dr. Mitchell, please accept our sincere apologies. You're clearly cleared to enter." But as Sarah moved to walk past, the guard stepped forward one last time. "I still need to check her bags," he insisted. "It's standard procedure." This was clearly a lie, as other passengers had been walking through without any bag checks. Dr. Wilson had had enough. "Standard procedure?" he asked loudly. "Funny, I didn't see you check anyone else's bags this morning, not Dr. Thompson's." He pointed to a white colleague who had walked in earlier. "Not Dr. Anderson's, not mine." The supervisor turned to her guard, her expression now stern. "That's enough, Jenkins. Step aside and report to my office immediately." Her voice left no room for argument. But the damage was done. Videos of the incident were already being shared in medical professional groups. Sarah's phone buzzed with messages of support from colleagues across the country. What had started as a simple check-in had become a viral moment highlighting the everyday racism many professionals face. The young girl broke away from her father and approached Sarah. "Dr. Mitchell," she said shyly, "I want to be a doctor like you when I grow up. My uncle says you're the best doctor he ever had." Sarah knelt down to the girl's level, momentarily forgetting about the crowd around them. "What's your name?" she asked gently. "Jasmine," the girl replied. "Well, Jasmine, you can be anything you want to be. Don't let anyone tell you where you do or don't belong." Sarah pulled out one of her business cards and wrote a personal note on the back before handing it to Jasmine. The moment touched everyone watching. Several people had tears in their eyes, understanding they were witnessing something much bigger than a simple case of mistaken identity. As the guard finally walked away with his supervisor, Dr. Wilson turned to Sarah. "How do you want to handle this?" he asked quietly. "We can file a formal complaint, contact the media." Sarah looked at Jasmine, who was excitedly showing her father the business card. She thought about all the other young girls and minorities who faced similar barriers. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about creating lasting change. "I have a better idea," Sarah replied, her mind already forming a plan. "But first, we have a conference to get to. And I think I just found the perfect opening for my keynote speech." As Sarah finally entered the private terminal, she felt the air conditioning cool her warm cheeks. The past hour had been intense, but she was determined not to let it affect her upcoming presentation. Around her, a group of supportive colleagues had formed a protective circle. Dr. Patricia Chen was still recording on her phone, but now she was live streaming to a private medical professionals group. "Everyone needs to see how one of our most brilliant surgeons was just treated," she explained to Sarah. The comments section was flooding with messages of support and similar stories from other doctors. The terminal staff, having heard about the incident, rushed to make things right. They'd offered Sarah and her colleagues comfortable seats in the VIP lounge and brought them coffee and breakfast. The contrast between this treatment and what had happened outside wasn't lost on anyone. "Dr. Mitchell," a gentle voice called. Sarah turned to see Maria Rodriguez, a nurse who had assisted in many of her surgeries. Maria had flown in from another state for the conference. "I just got off the phone with the hospital board. They're furious about what happened here." Sarah took a sip of her coffee, thinking carefully about her next steps. The incident had clearly grown beyond just her experience. Her phone kept buzzing with messages from colleagues, former patients, and even medical students she had mentored. One message caught her eye. It was from her daughter Amy. "Mom, you're trending on medical Twitter. Everyone's sharing stories about how you helped them in their careers. You're my hero." Dr. Robert Martinez approached with his laptop open. "Sarah, look at this," he said, showing her an online medical forum. Doctors across the country are sharing their own experiences with discrimination. Your incident has opened up an important conversation. The young girl Jasmine and her father were still in the terminal, waiting for their own flight. Jasmine's father approached Sarah, introducing himself as Michael Thompson. "Dr. Mitchell, you saved my brother's life last year," he said, his voice full of emotion. "When that guard treated you that way, I couldn't stay quiet." Sarah learned that Michael was a high school teacher who often told his students about her work, using her story to inspire young black students interested in medicine. "Now I have one more story to tell them," he said, "about standing up for yourself with dignity." The airline's regional manager arrived at the terminal, having been notified of the situation. She was a middle-aged woman who looked genuinely concerned. "Dr. Mitchell, I want to personally apologize for what happened," she said. "We're already planning mandatory sensitivity training for all our staff." As the boarding time approached, Sarah received another important message. It was from the conference organizers in Chicago. They wanted to add a panel discussion about diversity in medicine to the schedule, with Sarah as the lead speaker. Dr. Wilson gathered everyone's attention. "Our flight's ready," he announced. "But before we board, I think we should talk about how to use this moment to create real change." Sarah stood up, looking at the supportive faces around her. She saw different races, backgrounds, and specialties, all united in their support. "I have some ideas," she said. "But first, I need to make a quick call." She stepped aside to call Amy. Her daughter had always been her strongest supporter and best advisor. As she dialed, she noticed Jasmine watching her with admiring eyes. The girl was still holding Sarah's business card like it was a precious treasure. "Mom," Amy answered excitedly. "Are you okay? Everyone's talking about what happened." "I'm more than okay, sweetie," Sarah replied, smiling. "Remember how we always talked about turning bad situations into teaching moments? Well, this is our chance." As she ended the call, Sarah looked around the terminal. The security supervisor was leading the guard out, clearly heading to a serious meeting. Other passengers were showing their support through small gestures, respectful nods, kind smiles, and words of encouragement. The private jet was visible through the terminal windows, its steps already lowered and waiting. What had started as an attempt to block her path had instead opened new doors, not just for her, but for many others who would come after her. The private jet was more luxurious than anything Sarah had experienced before. As she settled into the soft leather seat, she couldn't help but think how the guard would react if he knew the level of comfort intended for the person he tried to turn away. Dr. Patricia Chen sat next to her, finally putting her phone down. "The video has over 50,000 views in just our medical network," she said quietly. "Hospital administrators across the country are calling for better security training. You've started something important, Sarah." Through the jet's window, Sarah could see Jasmine and her father watching the plane. The young girl was waving excitedly. Sarah waved back, remembering herself at that age. A little black girl with big dreams who just needed to see someone like her succeeding. As the plane took off, the conference organizers held an impromptu meeting in the jet's spacious cabin. Dr. Wilson had rearranged the conference schedule on his laptop. "We've added a special session after your keynote," he explained to Sarah. "If you're willing, we'd like you to lead a discussion about breaking barriers in medicine." Sarah opened her presentation notes on her tablet. Her original speech was about her new surgical technique, but now she saw an opportunity to address both medical innovation and social change. She began typing new notes, inspired by the morning's events. "You know," Dr. Martinez said, looking over from his seat, "that guard actually did us a favor. He exposed a problem we all knew existed but often ignored. Now we have to talk about it." The flight attendant served them breakfast, and Sarah noticed how the other passengers made sure she was comfortable and had everything she needed. It was a stark contrast to the treatment she'd received just hours ago on the ground. Her phone buzzed with a message from the hospital's chief of surgery. "Just saw what happened. Taking immediate action with all our security contractors. You've always been a pioneer in medicine, Sarah. Now you're pioneering change in other ways too." Halfway through the flight, Sarah received an unexpected email. It was from a major medical journal, requesting her to write an article about her experiences as a black woman in medicine. They wanted to publish it alongside her upcoming research paper. "Look at this," Dr. Chen said, showing Sarah her laptop. Medical students across the country were sharing their own stories of discrimination using a hashtag with Sarah's name. Many wrote about how her success had inspired them to pursue their dreams despite the obstacles. Sarah thought about her daughter Amy again. She had raised her to be strong, but also to be an agent of change. Now she had the chance to show Amy exactly what that meant. She began drafting an outline for her new keynote speech. Dr. Wilson watched her working and smiled. You're not just going to talk about brain surgery today, are you? He asked knowingly. The technical presentation stays, Sarah replied, her fingers moving quickly across her tablet's keyboard. But I'm adding something important. We need to talk about the other kind of barriers we need to break, the ones that aren't medical. The other doctors on the plane shared their own stories as they flew. One had been mistaken for a janitor despite wearing a white coat. Another had been asked to show ID 3 times before being allowed into her own operating room. Each story strengthened Sarah's resolve. As they approached Chicago, Sarah finished her revised speech. She had found a way to weave together the morning's incident with her medical breakthroughs, creating a powerful message about progress, both in medicine and in society. The pilot announced their descent into Chicago. Through the window, Sarah could see the city sprawling below, filled with hospitals, medical schools, and countless young people dreaming of careers in medicine. Some of them would face the same barriers she had faced. But thanks to what happened this morning, maybe some of those barriers would start coming down. The guard who tried to block her path had instead helped her open a door, one that would stay open for others to follow. As the plane touched down in Chicago, Sarah felt ready. Ready to share her medical knowledge, ready to tell her story, and ready to turn an ugly incident into a powerful catalyst for change. The Chicago Conference Center was massive, with glass walls that reached toward the sky. As Sarah walked through the main entrance, she noticed her face on the digital screens everywhere. She was listed as the keynote speaker, her medical achievements highlighted in bright letters. Dr. Mitchell called out Emma Thompson, the conference coordinator, rushing toward them with a tablet in hand. The main hall is already filling up. We've had to add extra seats because more people want to attend your session. She paused, looking slightly nervous. We've also received calls from 3 major medical news networks. They want to cover your speech. Sarah checked her phone one last time before heading to the preparation room. There was a message from Amy with a photo attached. Her daughter had pinned up a sign in their kitchen that read, "My mom. Surgeon, teacher, champion of change." Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes but quickly wiped them away. Dr. Patricia Chen was still by her side, showing her the latest updates. "The video from the airport has reached medical communities worldwide," she said. "Doctors from London, Tokyo, and Cape Town are sharing similar stories. You've started a global conversation, Sarah." The preparation room was quiet and cool. Sarah laid out her notes on the desk, reviewing her revised speech. The original medical presentation was still there, but now it was woven together with something bigger, a message about breaking down walls, both in the human brain and in human society. A gentle knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Dr. Martinez. "Sarah, there's someone here to see you," he said softly. Behind him stood a young black medical student from a local university. The student's eyes were filled with tears. "Dr. Mitchell," the student began, her voice shaking. "I'd almost quit medical school last month. The barriers seemed too high, the prejudice too strong. But after seeing what happened this morning, how you handled it, I'm staying. We all are." Sarah learned that the student, named Rachel, was part of a group of minority medical students who often faced discrimination. Rachel explained how they had started a support group after seeing the airport video, sharing their experiences and encouraging each other to persist. As Rachel left, Emma returned with more updates. "The guard from the airport has been suspended," she reported. "And the airline has announced a complete overhaul of their security training program. They're asking if you would consider being a consultant." Sarah stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Chicago skyline. In just a few hours, everything had changed. What started as an attempt to block her path had become a doorway to something much bigger. Dr. Wilson appeared at the door. "10 minutes until we start," he announced. "And Sarah, you need to see this." He held up his phone, showing her a live stream of the main hall. The huge room was packed, with people standing along the walls. Many wore white coats, some had stethoscopes around their necks, and all were there to hear her speak. But what caught Sarah's attention was a small group near the front. Somehow, Jasmine and her father had made it to the conference. The young girl was sitting there, still clutching Sarah's business card, her eyes full of hope and admiration. Sarah took a deep breath and gathered her materials. She thought about all the times in her career when people had tried to stop her, in medical school, during her residency, and even this morning. Each time, she had pushed forward, not just for herself, but for everyone who would come after her. "Dr. Mitchell?" Emma called softly. "It's time." As Sarah walked toward the main hall, she felt surprisingly calm. Her phone buzzed one last time, another message from Amy. "Show them who you are, Mom. Show them who we all can be." The sound of the crowd grew louder as she approached the entrance to the stage. Her presentation was ready, her message was clear, and her purpose was stronger than ever. What had started as a simple flight to give a medical lecture had become something much more, a chance to heal more than just bodies. Behind the curtain, Sarah straightened her blazer and smiled. The guard who tried to stop her would never know that he had actually helped her fly higher than any private jet could take her. The spotlight felt warm on Sarah's face as she walked onto the stage. The huge conference hall was completely silent, every eye fixed on her. She could see Jasmine's excited face in the front row, the young girl practically bouncing in her seat. "Good morning," Sarah began, her voice clear and strong. "Today, I was supposed to talk only about a new surgical technique. But sometimes, life gives us unexpected teaching moments." She paused, looking at the sea of faces before her. "This morning, a security guard tried to stop me from boarding a private jet because he didn't believe I belonged there." A murmur of anger rippled through the crowd. Sarah held up her hand gently. "But this isn't a story about anger," she continued. "This is a story about change. You see, in my work as a neurosurgeon, I've learned that the biggest barriers aren't always the ones we see in brain scans." She clicked to her first slide, showing the complex brain image. "When I developed this surgical technique, many people said it couldn't be done. They said the barriers were too great, the risks too high." She smiled. "But as I proved them wrong in the operating room, I realized something important. The same determination that helps us break through medical barriers can help us break through social ones." Sarah noticed several people in the audience wiping tears from their eyes. Others were nodding, understanding exactly what she meant. She saw medical students of all backgrounds leaning forward, hanging on her every word. "In surgery, we don't see skin color," she continued, moving to her next slide. "We see human beings who need help. Brains don't care what the surgeon looks like, they only care about the skill of the hands that heal them." As she explained her surgical technique, Sarah wove in stories from her career, the obstacles she'd faced, the victories she'd won, and the lives she'd saved. Each medical detail was connected to a larger message about breaking barriers and creating change. "When that guard stopped me this morning," she said, her voice growing stronger, "he didn't just stop a black woman. He tried to stop every dream that didn't fit his view of what success looks like. But he failed. And do you know why?" Sarah pointed to her surgical images. "Because just like these brain pathways we're looking at, human progress finds a way. When one path is blocked, we create new ones. When someone says, 'You don't belong here,' we prove them wrong by excelling." In the middle of the crowd, Sarah spotted Rachel, the medical student she'd met earlier. The young woman was furiously taking notes, tears streaming down her face. Next to her, other minority medical students sat tall, their faces full of pride and determination. "This surgical technique," Sarah explained, showing her final medical slides, "works because it creates new pathways in the brain. Today, we're creating new pathways too. Pathways of understanding, of opportunity, of change." The room was completely silent now. Everyone focused on her words. Even the medical journalists who had come to cover a simple surgical presentation were scribbling rapidly, knowing they were witnessing something historic. "To every young person who's been told they don't belong," Sarah said, looking directly at Jasmine, "to every student who's faced closed doors, to every professional who's had to prove themselves again and again, you do belong. Your dreams belong. Your talent belongs." She took a deep breath, preparing for her final words. "The guard who tried to stop me this morning thought he was protecting something, but what he really did was show us how much work we still have to do. And that work starts right here, right now, with each of us." Sarah clicked to her last slide, which showed a simple message: breaking barriers. 6 months had passed since that memorable day at the Chicago conference. Sarah sat in her office at the hospital, looking at the framed photo on her desk. It showed her with Jasmine and a group of young medical students, taken right after her speech. The image always made her smile. Her computer pinged with a new email notification. It was from the airport security guard, James Jenkins. This wasn't his first message. In fact, It was part of an ongoing conversation that had started with his unexpected apology letter 3 months ago. Dr. Mitchell, the email read, I wanted you to know that I just finished leading my first diversity training session for airport security staff. Your story has become a central part of our new training program. I was wrong that day, but you turned my mistake into a lesson that's helping change many lives. Sarah looked up as her daughter Amy walked into the office, carrying 2 cups of coffee. Now in her senior year of high school, Amy had started volunteering at the hospital after school. More good news, Mom, she asked, noticing her mother's smile. You could say that, Sarah replied, showing Amy the email. Remember how I always told you that sometimes the biggest obstacles can lead to the biggest changes? The changes had indeed been significant. The video of the airport incident had gone viral in medical communities worldwide, sparking important conversations about bias in healthcare and other professional fields. Sarah's conference speech had been viewed millions of times online. Her phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Patricia Chen. Just finished interviewing another round of medical school candidates. You'll be happy to know that applications from minority students are up 40% this year. They'd all mention your story as their inspiration. Sarah opened her desk drawer and pulled out a letter she'd received yesterday. It was from Jasmine, the young girl from the airport. Now, 6 months later, Jasmine was president of her high school's new medical sciences club. She had attached a photo of their first meeting. 15 young students, mostly minorities, all dreaming of careers in medicine. A knock on her office door interrupted her thoughts. It was Rachel, the medical student she'd met before her speech. Rachel was now doing her rotation at Sarah's hospital, and she had exciting news. Dr. Mitchell, remember that support group we started after your speech? Rachel's eyes were bright with excitement. It's now a national organization. We have chapters in 50 medical schools. We're calling it Breaking Barriers in Medicine, and we'd love for you to be our honorary chairperson. Sarah stood up and hugged the young woman. She remembered clearly how tearful and uncertain Rachel had been 6 months ago. Now she stood tall, confident, ready to help others along their path. Her computer pinged again. This time it was a message from the hospital board. They had approved her proposal for a new mentorship program specifically designed to support minority medical professionals at all levels. The program would be named after her. Dr. Mitchell, her assistant, called from the door. Your next patient is ready, and you might want to know who it is. Sarah walked to the consultation room and found herself face to face with the security supervisor from that day at the airport. My mother needs brain surgery, the supervisor explained, her eyes hopeful. After what happened that day, after seeing how you handled everything, I knew you were the doctor we needed. Later that evening, as Sarah prepared to leave the hospital, she passed the wall where her framed conference speech hung. The hospital had put it up as inspiration for staff and patients alike. Below it was a quote they pulled from her speech. Breaking barriers isn't just about getting past them yourself, it's about holding the door open for others to follow. Her phone buzzed one last time. It was a message from an unknown number with a photo attached. The photo showed a young black girl, maybe 7 years old, dressed up as a doctor for career day. She was holding a sign that read, When I grow up, I want to be like Dr. Sarah Mitchell. Sarah smiled, gathering her things to head home. That difficult morning at the airport could have left her bitter. Instead, it had opened doors she never expected, doors that would stay open for generations to come. As she walked to her car, she passed several medical students heading home. They smiled and waved, some taking the same path she had cleared, others creating new ones. And that, she realized, was the greatest success of all.